A private prison doesn't get paid for justice. It gets paid for occupancy. It doesn't earn a single cent for catching a criminal, for rehabilitating one, or for making a city safer. It earns money for one thing only, a body in a bed tonight. And in the very best contracts in this entire business, it gets paid for that bed even when it sits completely empty. This is the economics of owning a private prison, one of the most profitable, most guaranteed, and most deeply uncomfortable businesses in America. Because somewhere, someone has turned the question of who sits behind bars into a line on a spreadsheet. Here's the first thing to understand. A private prison company is not really in the justice business. It's in the real estate and staffing business. It doesn't arrest anyone. It doesn't write the laws, set the sentences, or decide who is guilty. All of that stays with the government. What a private prison company actually does is build or buy the building, hire the guards, run the kitchen, and then rent that entire operation back to the state. By the inmate, by the day. You are not looking at a courthouse. You are looking at a landlord whose tenants cannot leave, do not pay their own rent, and never chose to move in, because the rent is paid by the taxpayer. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to 1983. American prisons were dangerously overcrowded, and the government was drowning. Into that mess stepped a brand new company, Corrections Corporation of America, known today as CoreCivic, with a radical pitch. Let us run a prison the way you would run a hotel chain. We will build the beds faster, fill them, and operate them cheaper than the state ever could. And with that, the modern private prison industry was born. The way the money works is beautifully, almost disturbingly simple. It is called a per diem, a flat daily rate the government pays for every single inmate held. House them, feed them, guard them for one day, and the state cuts a check for that day. Those rates run anywhere from around $50 a day in some state contracts to well over $100. One of the two giants of this industry recently averaged more than $110 per inmate per day across all of its operations. Now multiply that by a few thousand beds. Then multiply that by 365 days a year. A single medium-sized facility can pull in tens of millions of dollars a year, flowing in from the government like clockwork, one occupied bed at a time. And let's actually do that math because the scale of it is staggering. Take a single facility with 2,000 beds, paid $100 a day for each inmate. Keep it full, and that is $200,000 a day. Over a year, that is more than $70 million in revenue. Out of one building for doing something the government could, in theory, do entirely itself. Now picture a company operating dozens of these facilities at once, and you begin to see how this quietly became a multi-billion-dollar machine. And this is a genuinely enormous industry. Two companies tower over it. CoreCivic and the GEO Group. Between them, they run most of the private prison capacity in the United States, and together they bring in billions of dollars every year. Today, roughly 8% of all state and federal prisoners in America sleep in a bed that is owned and operated by a private, for-profit company. But here is the single most extraordinary clause in this entire business: the occupancy guarantee. When these companies sign a contract with the government, they often negotiate a minimum occupancy rate, a written promise that the prison will be kept a certain percentage full, 80%, 90%. In some deals, 95 or even 100. And if the state fails to supply enough prisoners to hit that number, the taxpayer pays for the empty beds anyway. Read that again. If crime falls, if courts send fewer people away, if a neighborhood gets safer, the company still gets paid, as though every one of those cells were full. Critics have a blunt name for this arrangement. They call it the low crime tax. The public is contractually obligated to keep the prison full or to pay exactly as if it had. It is one of the only businesses on earth that is financially protected against its own product becoming less necessary. Picture a hotel that got paid whether or not a single guest ever checked in. That is the guarantee sitting at the very heart of the private prison. So if the revenue is a fixed daily rate, where does the actual profit come from? From spending less than that rate to house each inmate. And this is exactly where the business collides with its critics. Every dollar not spent on a guard, a meal, a doctor, or a rehabilitation program is a dollar that drops straight to profit. So the incentive baked into the model is to run as lean as possible. Fewer staff, lower wages, cheaper food, thinner medical care. For years, investigations and watchdogs have pointed to understaffing and aggressive cost-cutting inside some private facilities, and argued that the drive for profit and the public interest can pull sharply in opposite directions. And there is a darker criticism still. If your revenue depends on full beds, then your business quietly benefits from more people being locked up for longer. A normal company wants its customers to succeed and move on with their lives. This one earns more when they come back. Opponents have accused the industry of lobbying for tougher sentencing and stricter enforcement, shaping the very laws that fill its cells. The companies push back hard on every part of this. They argue that they simply provide capacity the government desperately needs and cannot build fast enough on its own. They say they are held to the same standards as public prisons, that they save taxpayers real money, and that they do not write sentencing law. They only operate the facilities the state asks them to run. Both of these stories, the critics and the companies, are exactly why this business is fought over so bitterly. But here is what truly drives the value of a private prison, and it is not crime. It is politics. This entire industry lives and dies by who holds power and what they choose to do with it. When one administration announced it would phase out the federal government's use of private prisons, the share prices of these companies collapsed almost overnight. Their whole business model suddenly looked like it could be signed out of existence with a pen. And then the wind changed direction completely. As immigration enforcement ramped up, a vast new customer walked through the door. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE detention has exploded, and these companies have raced to fill it. One of the giants pushed its ICE bed usage to the highest level in its history. Revenue from ICE has multiplied several times over for both companies. It now makes up roughly a third of one company's entire business and closer to half of the others. The single biggest growth engine in the private prison industry today is not state crime at all. It is immigration detention. And there is one final twist that tells you precisely what these companies really are. For years, both giants were legally structured not as prison operators, but as real estate investment trusts, REITs, the exact same corporate structure used by shopping malls and apartment landlords. On paper, they were not wardens. They were landlords of cells. And this is what makes the private prison unlike almost any business you will ever study. In a normal market, the customer chooses to walk in, pays with their own money, and leaves satisfied so that they will come back again. Here, the customer is confined against their will, pays nothing at all, and the company's fortunes rise the longer that person stays and the more people arrive behind them. The human being at the center of the entire transaction has no say in it whatsoever. It is a market with a product, a payer, and a price. But the one thing that is not free is the person the whole thing is built around. So step back and look at who actually holds the safe money in this system. It is not the taxpayer who pays the per diem, funds the empty beds, and carries the moral weight of the whole outcome. And it is not the government agency which absorbs the political heat for every damning headline. The operator sits quietly in the middle, collecting a guaranteed daily rate, often protected against low demand, with the state supplying the customers and the public supplying the cash. On paper, it looks like a near-perfect annuity, predictable, government-backed, almost recession-proof. And yet it is one of the riskiest safe businesses you could ever own. Because everything depends on political permission. One election, one executive order, one shift in the public mood, and a guaranteed cash machine turns into a stranded, half-empty asset overnight. You are not really betting on crime, or even on immigration. You are betting on which direction the country decides to point its power next. So, should you own a private prison? Financially, the model is ruthlessly efficient. Guaranteed occupancy, government checks, and costs you get to control yourself. But it is chained to politics, soaked in controversy, and morally heavier than any other business we have ever put on this channel. A company whose growth depends, quite directly, on more human beings being confined. Worth owning. Call it a 5 out of 10. The cash flow is real and remarkably well protected, but you are renting cells to the state, betting on the politics of punishment, and every dollar of profit arrives attached to a question most businesses never have to ask. The state decides who goes in, the taxpayer pays the bill, and the landlord, the one who quietly owns the beds, collects the rent either way, full or empty. I'm Mogul Math. Pick a business, we'll do the math.